counsel, witness in turn with plaintiffs 8.
Sure. Yes.
Good morning.
Good afternoon.
In coming to your conclusions in today's case, you relied on certain portions of this election audit, right?
I wouldn't say I relied on them. I reviewed the audit.
Redirecting you back to my question, you relied on certain portions of that document in coming to your conclusions in today's case.
I did look at certain portions of this, yes, sir.
And in those portions, you relied upon them in coming to the conclusions of today's case. Isn't that true?
I relied on some of those portions. Some of those portions were also incorrect.
I just want to make a couple of things clear what you relied upon.
Sure.
You relied on paragraphs 1 through 12.
I looked at those paragraphs, yes, sir. I'd have to reread them to see what they are.
You're telling us you don't remember what you relied upon in coming to your conclusions in today's case?
I don't remember exactly what paragraphs 1 and 12 are. Those are the background, the qualifications, the engagement, the summary. Yes, I relied on those.
You relied on paragraphs 20 through 22.
Let's see, the findings. I looked at those findings, yes, sir.
And you relied on paragraphs 28 through 38.
I looked at those paragraphs as well, yes, sir.
And you relied on all those portions in coming to your conclusions in today's trial.
I wouldn't say I relied on them. I said I looked at them. I disagree with some of the conclusions Ms. Davis made, however.
Is it your testimony today that you didn't rely on those portions in coming to your conclusions of today's case?
They were part of the evidence I looked at, but they weren't part of what I looked at for my conclusions.
To direct you back to my question, did you rely on these portions in coming to your conclusions of today's case?
You could say that in the sense that I looked at them, yes, sir.
Your Honor, I would object at this point to non-responsive to the question. He's clearly has stated that he's looked at them, but I'm asking this witness if he has relied upon these portions in coming to his conclusion.
I would agree. I think there's a big difference between relying on and looking at. So please answer the question directly.
Yes, sir.
Did you rely on the portions I've just listed in coming to your conclusions of today's case?
Yes, sir, I did.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff offers plaintiffs a redacted portion, constructively speaking, of the election audit of Dr. Layton Davis.
What's the, explain the redaction.
The portions of which this witness has not relied upon.
Okay. Any objection?
I do object. I think it's improper for the jury to only see a redacted version. They need to see the document in its entirety to be able to understand context, but the document in its entirety is hearsay.
Response?
Your Honor,
But hold on. You're objecting in general to hearsay, not
In general
just-
to hearsay, and I'm saying the reason they can't
Okay.
redact is because it would not give them the full context.
Let's deal with hearsay first. What's your response to hearsay?
Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 703, if the probative value outweighs the prejudicial effect, this evidence may be offered into evidence so the jury may better weigh this witness's testimony. This witness has just testified against one of the elements that we have to prove today, that element being that the fraud would not change the outcome of the election.
May I agree? Brief response.
Yes, pursuant to 703, it must substantially outweigh. Pursuant to case law, Richards versus Mississippi Barbecue, they're simply using this expert as a conduit to hearsay. The person who created this report,
But it doesn't matter if it's hearsay under 703. What's the...
Your Honor, Richards versus Mississippi Barbecue specifically states that they may not simply use an expert as a conduit to hearsay, which is what they're doing here. They're not having him go into details about how this impacted his report.
But Mr. Sample's argument is that even if it's hearsay, under 703, it can still be admitted because it's data relied upon for an expert to come to his opinion. That's what 703 says. Even if it is hearsay, therefore Richards is inapplicable here. How does the probative value not substantially outweigh the prejudicial value?
Well, if we're specifically talking about a redacted version, the probative value could mislead the jury. It does not allow them to fully understand the audit in its entirety. The person who made this audit could have been called here today, but the plaintiff chose not to call them. So therefore, it's improper for them to use this expert as a conduit to get this report in so that they can get the conclusions from it without actually cross-examining the person who wrote it.
Okay, the hearsay objection is overruled. Mr. Sample, respond to Mr. Vandenberg's 403 argument based on the redaction of the report.
Your Honor, the opposing counsel called Mr. Michael to the stand and had him testify in today's trial. Opposing counsel has laid the foundation for this witness to be recognized by this court as an expert. In doing so, the opposing counsel must recognize the facts and data this witness is relied upon, and opposing counsel has opened the door for me to attack the facts and data that the witness relied upon in coming to his conclusions.
Mr. Sample, I appreciate that, but please respond to Mr. Vandenberg's argument that the redacted version is prejudicial, substantially more prejudicial than probative under Rule 403.
Your Honor, there is no substantial prejudicial effect by having the jury weigh the witness's testimony in today's trial. The probative value of this is extremely important because this document that this witness reviewed actually says that absent the fraud, candidate Ginger would have won. And it's important for the members of the jury, and that is highly probative in today's trial.
Your Honor, may I respond?
No, I agree with you, Mr. Sample. Mr. Vandenberg, if you decide that on redirect, there are other probative portions of the report that were not constructively redacted and need to bring them up, you can feel free to do so, but I agree that only the portions that the witness relied upon in coming to his conclusion will be admitted. Everything else is constructively redacted. The document in that form is admitted into evidence.
Yes, Your Honor. May I approach the witness and retrieve evidence?
Yes. So officially for the record, the 403 objection is overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Michael, this document concludes that absent the fraud in District 12, candidate Ginger would have won the election.
Using two incorrect assumptions, it does conclude that, sir.
Well, I want to talk about your opinion on those assumptions. But first, I want to talk about your credentials.
Certainly.
You only have a bachelor's in political science and a master's in demographic and social analysis.
Well, I wouldn't say only, sir, but those are my degrees.
You're aware that the author of this audit has a bachelor's in political science?
Objection, Your Honor, is substantially more prejudicial than probative to the jury. Simply listing off degrees between the auditor and Mr. Michael can prejudice the jury into believing that simply because someone has a degree that Mr. Michael does not, that they are somehow more qualified to make an opinion. That is for the finder of fact, and it is prejudicial for them to only hear that and not understand the entire context. Again, they could have called Ms. Davis and they chose not to.
Very briefly.
Pursuant to Rule 607, the credibility of any witness may be attacked or supported. This is exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah, I think 403 is a high bar. If you feel that there's any information that he's left out that you feel is necessary, feel free to bring it up on redirect. Overruled.
You're aware that the author of this audit has a bachelor's degree in political science.
That's correct.
He has a law degree.
I'm sorry, Miss Dr. Davis has a law degree, yes, sir.
You're aware that, well, you don't have a law degree, do you?
No, sir, I do not. But I do have 14 years' experience in this field that Dr. Davis does not.
Well, let's talk about experience in just a moment. Dr. Davis, he teaches election law at the University of Georgia.
She teaches that law, yes, sir.
And you don't teach at all, do you?
No, I like to be hands-on with my work.
Now, let's talk about this experience that you keep bringing up. You've worked in polling firms all your life.
I've worked in polling firms for about 14 years now, yes, sir.
This is the 5th time you've worked for Mayor Heisman.
That's correct. Mayor Heisman was responsible for about 3% of N5's revenue stream.
And that 3%. Mayor Heisman, over the course of you working for her, she's paid you about $500,000.
Right. Mayoral elections aren't nearly as lucrative as the national stuff we usually cover.
Now, Dr. Davis's experience, in addition to being teaching at the University of Georgia, she's published about 100 books, right?
I believe she has. I'm not sure. I'd have to see the record again.
Well, you're aware that she's published nearly 100 times?
Published nearly 100 times. I don't think all those were books, though, so that's a lot of books.
Okay. Well, you're aware that Dr. Davis has received many awards and honors for these publications?
She has. She's well accomplished in her field, and she made 2 mistakes.
You have no honors or awards, do you?
No, I'm not an academic. I'm hands-on and practical with my work.
We're going to get hands-on. You've never testified before the United States Senate.
No, sir, I have not had that honor.
But Dr. Davis has.
I believe she has once.
Now, despite these 2 different sets of credentials, you still believe Dr. Davis has made an error in her work.
Certainly, she used outdated numbers, the February numbers, rather than the March numbers, which were more recent. Second, she assumed that trend from the February numbers would hold throughout the election, which simply wasn't true as the election results showed.
Well, let's get into those numbers. The last poll that your firm has conducted was before fraud had ever occurred, right?
You're referring to the March poll, sir?
The February.
That poll was also conducted before any fraud was alleged, sir.
Now, in your work, you assumed fraud did occur in District 12, right?
Right, that's what we do. We assume the null hypothesis, and then we disprove it, as I did.
Now, your March poll that you've talked a lot about, this is 2 weeks after the fraud had occurred in District 12.
It was my understanding that all of the alleged fraud had occurred on the day of the election, sir.
You're aware from Dr. Davis's report that over 100 phone calls were being made to the citizens of District 12, right?
Yes, but it was my understanding that most of those were made on Election Day, sir.
You're aware that prior to this election day, about 160 people were affected by election fraud.
Yes, that's what Dr. Davis concluded, but I disagree with that conclusion, sir.
Is it your testimony today that the people of District 12 were only affected on election day by this election fraud?
No, sir, you're misunderstanding me. I was merely saying that the majority of the alleged fraud had occurred on Election Day, though some of it, in minor portions, had occurred prior to.
I want to get one thing clear as far as what you're basing that testimony on. The only information you have regarding voting fraud is in this audit by Dr. Davis, right?
Dr. Davis collected information from other people, and I relied on her information in that fact, yes, sir.
You understand that the only thing Dr. Davis says as far as time frame goes is during the 2 weeks prior to election that they received phone calls regarding election fraud, right?
She said something to that effect, sir, yes.
She never says in this audit that voters were mainly affected on election day, isn't that right?
Well, it was my understanding that there were also text messages, sir.
Okay, but redirecting back to my question, she doesn't state that any of these phone calls were made on election day.
She doesn't give a specific time period for those, no, sir.
Now, the February data, your poll concluded that 90% of District 12 supported Elizabeth Ginger, isn't that right?
In February, yes, sir, but the election showed that that wasn't true in March.
Redirecting back to my question, I'm not asking about the election results. The February poll data that you've done concluded 90% support for Elizabeth Ginger.
90% support in February, yes.
Now, I want to keep to this poll for just a minute because I don't want to talk about a poll after fraud. You're aware in 2011, 19.5% of registered voters actually voted, right?
In 2011, yes, but again, that number is very volatile.
Now, in your analysis for today's case, you performed a lot of math and dictating a number of different scenarios that could have occurred, right?
That was one of the analyses I performed, sir, yes.
Now, you did an analysis on 90% Ginger support, right?
Yes, that was one of the scenarios I examined.
You also analyzed the different scenarios as far as 90% support versus different amounts of turnout, right?
I did, sir.
You would agree with me that if the same percentage of voters in 2011 voted in 2015, Ginger would have enough votes to win this election.
If pigs had wings, they could fly, and I found that, yes, if that had happened, it would have happened, but that wasn't what the evidence showed me.
I'm not asking about what would have happened as far as pigs flying, Mr. Michael. According to your analysis, if 90% of District 12 with a 19.5% show-up voted for Ginger, Ginger would have won.
If we assume that unlikely scenario, yes, sir.
Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Redirect, Your Honor.
If it's really brief.
Mr. Michael, the numbers they just showed you, which polls are those based off of?
Those are based off the February polls and the 2011 election results, sir.
Which polls did that audit use?
The February numbers, sir.
Why did you not use the February numbers?
In the weeks leading up to election, a lot can change. In fact, the week before election, any pollster will tell you that that's a really important time. So I wanted to rely on the weeks right before the election, the most recent polling data, which was also supported by the 2015 election results. They matched up almost exactly.
And now, I also want to talk about this other number, 19.5. Was this the actual registered voter turnout in 2015?
No, sir. That was the percentage of registered voters who showed up in 2011.
Is it likely that the same percentage would have held between 2011 and 2015?
No. See, voter registration is very volatile. It's really easy to register to vote, but it's a lot harder to actually get people into the voting booth to vote.
Do you agree with the conclusions in that report?
I do not.
And does having a degree prevent you from making a mistake in an audit?
Absolutely not. People who are academics with all kinds of degrees make mistakes all the time. I've seen it happen.
Does testifying before the Senate prevent you from making a mistake in your audit?
As a pollster, I can tell you, no, sir, it doesn't.
Does having an award prevent you from making a mistake in your audit?
I would object. Opposing counsel said they had a brief redirect, and this is far wrong.
Your Honor, may I
I
respond?
mean, I agree that this isn't very brief, but I think the
I have
jury,
8 seconds, so it'll be pretty brief.
I think the jury gets the point, overruled.
Does having an award prevent you from making a mistake in your audit?
No, sir, it doesn't.
No further questions.
All right, anything based on that, Mr. Sample?
Yes, Your Honor.
Really?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yep.
The February polling data was before any fraud had occurred in District 12.
Before any alleged fraud, sir, yes.
Now, the audit chose a different polling data, but I want to get this understanding of why the decision was made. Dr. Davis has a degree in quantitative methods.
As you stated.
Objection, Your Honor, outside the scope of cross-examination or redirect.
This is foundation, Your Honor, for me to understand why this witness made the decisions that he has done. The opposing counsel has questioned this witness on his opinion, and we are diving into why he gave these answers.
Pretty sure we've covered all of this, Mr. Sample. Why is it necessary to go over it again?
It's foundation briefly for my last question.
What is your last question?
Does he have a doctorate in quantitative methods?
Your Honor, then this is asked and answered.
I
That's
feel
already covered.
we've gone over all of this. We understand his qualifications. We understand the qualifications of the independent auditor. We don't need to do it again. Do you have any other questions, Mr. Sample?
Yes, Your Honor. No further questions then.
Thank you.
May the witness be excused, Your Honor.
Yes, you may.